Putin's plan is falling apart again. In his January 4th nightly address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky broke the news with unflinching precision. In battles today and yesterday near just one village, Makhnovka in the Kursk region, the Russian army lost up to an infantry battalion, including North Korean soldiers and Russian paratroopers. And this is true. A battalion. That's 500 to 1,000 troops erased from the battlefield. Their mission? To bolster Russia's faltering offensive. Their reality? A catastrophic footnote in a war they were woefully unprepared for. But here's the kicker. These weren't just any troops. They were supposed to be the elite reinforcements Kim Jong-un promised Putin, the best North Korea had to offer. And yet they fell so quickly you have to wonder, were they ready for this fight? Or was this an act of desperation from a regime running out of options? What went so wrong? Why did North Korea's best crumble on their first major deployment? And what does this stunning failure mean for Russia's war and the global alliances teetering on its edges? Stick around, because this story is only just beginning. Let's travel back in time, minus the fancy time machine. Kursk, a region once synonymous with the largest tank battle in World War II, now has the unenviable fate of starring in yet another conflict. Picture rolling plains and rail lines that snake through the land like a lazy cat on a Sunday. Once upon a century, well, less than that, endless fields here turned into tank graveyards in 1943. A front-row seat to the earth-shaking clash between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Red Army. Think of Kursk as the place history just can't seem to leave alone. The reason these fields have become so popular with, let's say, heavily armed vacationers? It's strategically essential. If you hold Kursk, you can channel supplies, send reinforcements, and show off your brand new hardware for the cameras. Except nowadays, the cameras are drones, the shells are smarter, and the visitors might not be as prepared as they think. So why on earth would President Putin decide that 12,000 North Korean soldiers should join this war party? Well, that's simple. It's an old-fashioned game of flex the muscles. Only this time, the flex is more Charlie horse than bodybuilder pose. Allegedly, these North Korean troops would help Russia reassert control in Kursk, like a boxer bringing in a new sparring partner for a tired match. But as one sarcastic diplomat might say, nothing says we've got this under control quite like importing troops from halfway around the world. In fact, as the war drags on, many are shaking their heads, calling it a colossal failure. It's getting so embarrassing that even the censors can't keep up. So yes, we're witnessing a momentous occasion. The first time another country's regular forces have stepped in where mercenaries once roamed. Let's just say there's a big difference between volunteering your foreign legion versus turning up unprepared for a fight on the plains of Kursk. Here's the kicker. These North Korean soldiers were billed as elite, apparently the top of Kim Jong-un's formidable roster. But were they truly battle-hardened? Or did they receive a crash course in advanced marching? In the next segment, we'll dive into their so-called elite training and the cracks that began to show the moment they set foot on Kursk's muddy terrain. Stay tuned. We're about to reveal why these troops may not have been ready for prime time and how their deployment is affecting Russia's grand plan. After all, if you're going to fly thousands of soldiers across continents, you'd expect them to do more than become front-page headlines for military upsets. Next up, we reveal the elite status of these North Korean troops and why it's not all it was cracked up to be. On January 4th, President Volodymyr Zelensky took to Ukraine's airwaves with a bombshell that left observers rubbing their eyes in disbelief. Quoting official figures from Ukraine's Ministry of Defense and corroborated by Reuters, Zelensky declared, in just 48 hours, Ukrainian forces wiped out an entire battalion of North Korean troops. In war terms, a battalion often numbers between 500 to 1,000 soldiers. Enough boots on the ground to fill a modest local stadium. Yet, within 2 days, they simply ceased to exist as a fighting force. The news hit like a lightning bolt. Was this an inevitable failure of untested troops thrown into a modern war? Or did Ukraine just score the upset of the year? Either way, it sent a jolt through Russia's command structures, where heads are presumably swiveling faster than a broken merry-go-round. The commander-in-chief also reported on the situation in the Kursk region, Zelensky told his listeners during his daily address. Specifically, in battles today and yesterday near just one village, Makhnovka in the Kursk region, the Russian army lost up to a battalion of infantry, including North Korean soldiers and Russian paratroopers. And that's tangible, Zelensky concluded. Picture the battlefield, bullet-scarred vehicles smoldering on the horizon, frantic radio chatter cracking in the background, and then a sudden, ghostly silence where a battalion once stood. For Ukrainian defenders, it was a moment of vindication, testament to weeks of grueling training and unwavering morale. You can almost hear them saying, "We stood firm, and they never saw us coming." For Russian commanders, though, let's just say it's not the highlight reel they wanted to show off on the nightly news. Morale in the Russian camp took another tumble, with soldiers wondering if these foreign reinforcements were supposed to be the cavalry or a miscalculated gambit. Meanwhile, on the Ukrainian side, the adrenaline spiked. The feeling of turning the tide, even briefly, has been a powerful motivator for troops and civilians alike. So, why such a swift rout? According to military analysts quoted by The Guardian, lack of coordination played a key role. Because North Korean troops were unfamiliar with local terrain, communication codes, and immediate chain of command, Ukrainian defenders seized the opportunity. They drove a wedge between scattered platoons, picked off vulnerable outposts, and effectively neutralized a unit that was supposed to be formidable. In short, one major tactical blunder led to a textbook example of the old divide and conquer principle. When the dust cleared, that battalion, once hyped as an elite force, was left scattered across the fields of Kursk. As the conflict grinds on, military experts are watching closely to see if more reinforcements will share the same fate or if lessons are actually being learned. Because if there's anything this war has taught us so far, it's that assuming you have the upper hand often leads to watching your forces crumble faster than you can say reinforcements. Russia didn't just wake up one morning and think, "Let's lose Kursk." According to Reuters, the Kremlin mobilized nearly 50,000 troops after its staggering losses in August 2024, determined to reclaim the land as if it were their long-lost family heirloom. The logic seems straightforward. More boots on the ground, more territory retaken, right? But reality has a cruel sense of humor. Shoring up defenses on wide-open plains is no small feat, especially when Ukrainian forces are perfectly content turning every village and roadside into a fortified zone. Worse yet, the human cost is enormous. Tens of thousands of lives hinge on every mile, a bleak reminder that strategy on paper rarely translates to easy wins on the battlefield. Enter the North Korean reinforcements, parachuting into this mess like uninvited guests at a family reunion. Mixing Russian paratroopers, already stretched thin, according to BBC military analysts, with North Korean soldiers feels like a recipe for confusion. Neither side shares a common language, and crucial coordination vanishes the moment bullets start flying. One Western official, quoted in The Guardian, summed it up nicely. Due to poor training and lack of logistical support, DPRK haven't started the fight yet. In other words, these soldiers weren't just behind schedule, they were behind the learning curve too. So, does overwhelming manpower guarantee success? So far, it looks about as promising as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. Large troop numbers might impress on camera, but when you can't efficiently command them, you end up with pockets of soldiers wandering in circles, or worse, walking into ambushes. If Russia can't iron out these complications, we could see more battalion-level disasters on the horizon. And that's the question looming over Kursk. How many more underprepared troops will end up stuck in the crossfire? The battle lines aren't just drawn on the map. They're etched into the heart of a region where every misstep could cost another 100 lives. Meanwhile, Putin went wrong from the very first step because North Korean soldiers are entirely different from what the world imagines. Putin may think they're somewhat inferior, but in overwhelming numbers, they still present an advantage. However, in reality, North Korean soldiers are not just a little bit lacking. Meet the Storm Corps, North Korea's self-proclaimed special forces, touted as their most elite unit. On paper, they're the best of the best, a hand-picked group trained to infiltrate enemy lines, disrupt operations, and accomplish what regular troops cannot. But here's the catch. Best is a very relative term. Take it from Hanel, a former Storm Corps soldier turned defector, whose story was reported by the BBC. During his time with the unit, Hanel didn't get the high-tech gear or cutting-edge training you'd expect from elite forces. Instead, he faced malnutrition so severe that he lost 22 pounds in just 1 month, surviving on little more than moldy cabbage and cracked corn. His battalion eventually became so undernourished they were sent to a recovery center to gain enough weight just to stand straight. Now picture these soldiers, physically weak, mentally fatigued, and barely trained, stepping into the chaos of modern warfare, where drones dominate the skies, artillery rains down in precise strikes, and battle-hardened Ukrainian troops have spent years fortifying their defenses. It's not just the lack of food or proper training. These troops carry the crushing weight of fear, not for themselves, but for their families back home. Kim Jong-un's regime keeps an iron grip on the relatives of deployed soldiers, and any failure in the field could spell dire consequences for their loved ones. According to reports in The Guardian, some North Korean soldiers have taken their own lives rather than face capture, knowing their families might be punished for their perceived dishonor. Imagine this: underfed, poorly armed soldiers, many of whom have only fired 3 live rounds in training, walking into a war zone where every sound is a potential threat. They're not just facing an enemy, they're facing the stark reality of their own inadequacies, highlighted against a backdrop of advanced weaponry and seasoned opponents. The fear, desperation, and sheer unpreparedness paint a heartbreaking picture. Let's be real. Elite was likely just a propaganda label slapped on these troops to save face. In truth, many of these soldiers had minimal combat training. Hanul shared that his unit spent more time practicing martial arts, like breaking blocks of ice with their hands, than they did learning modern combat techniques. As impressive as those stunts might look on state-run TV, they're not much help when you're facing thermal scopes and guided missiles. And then there's the weaponry, or lack thereof. According to defectors cited in South Korean intelligence reports, North Korean soldiers often rely on outdated rifles, such as AK-47, and makeshift tools. They've been spotted scavenging for supplies, using kitchen utensils as improvised weapons. Elite? Perhaps, if your idea of an elite force is an under-equipped group that spends more time surviving than strategizing. The harsh truth is that these troops weren't sent to Russia because they were ready for war. They were sent because North Korea needed the cash, oil, and political favors Russia offered in return. The Storm Corps were never meant to face the realities of Kursk's modern battlefield, and their deployment is a tragic reminder that propaganda can only carry an army so far. What's next for North Korea's so-called elites? Will reinforcements arrive better prepared, or will we see history repeat itself in even more devastating ways? One thing's for sure. The battlefield of Kursk is exposing the cracks in a carefully crafted image that's crumbling under the weight of reality. With soldiers like these, we certainly cannot expect them to achieve anything miraculous on the battlefield. However, Putin either does not realize this, or now that he does, he is employing strategies that seem nearly impossible. The human wave tactic has been deployed. If you can't picture it, imagine this: an endless line of soldiers, armed only with rifles, charging straight into Ukraine's fortified defenses. This isn't strategy, it's a desperate bid for survival. The North Korean soldiers, poorly equipped and inadequately prepared, have been thrown into what military historians refer to as the meat grinder of Kursk. According to Reuters reports, these troops were ordered to advance into battle in successive waves, on foot, with minimal support. The ground shakes under relentless artillery fire. Radios crackle with despair, commanders shouting incomprehensible orders amid the chaos. And then silence. The wave has been shattered, not on the shores of victory, but against Ukraine's heavily fortified lines. For many, their final moments were spent staring up at a cold gray sky, aware they had been sent merely as cannon fodder. The psychological toll of such tactics is impossible to overstate. These soldiers aren't just fighting against an external enemy, they're battling the crushing weight of fear and despair. Reports from The Guardian and South Korea's National Intelligence Service reveal a grim reality. Some North Korean troops, overwhelmed by the hopelessness of their situation, are taking their own lives rather than face capture. Why? The answer lies in the long shadow of Kim Jong-un's regime. In North Korea, being captured isn't just a mark of personal failure, it's a potential death sentence for your family. Every soldier knows the stakes. Fail on the battlefield, and your loved ones could pay the ultimate price. This fear of retribution adds a layer of desperation to an already dire situation. One particularly chilling report captures the gravity of their plight. Some North Koreans are dying by their own hands, reducing the risk of Kim Jong-un taking revenge on their families. This isn't just a war fought with bullets and bombs, it's a war fought within the minds of those forced to endure it. The numbers paint a grim picture, even if the exact figures remain disputed. By the end of December 2024, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed that 3,800 North Korean soldiers had been killed or wounded in Kursk. However, South Korean intelligence offers a more conservative estimate, placing the number closer to 1,100 casualties. Regardless of whose math you trust, the conclusion is the same: the toll is devastating. In just a few weeks, North Korea's so-called elite troops have suffered losses so catastrophic that military experts are openly questioning why they were deployed at all. The answer, it seems, lies in desperation rather than strategy. This isn't war as you might imagine it in a history book or blockbuster film. It's chaos, futility, and human suffering on an industrial scale. And while Russia might claim these tactics are necessary for their objectives in Kursk, the human cost tells a very different story. The question now is, how long can such tactics continue before the morale of the troops and the patience of their commanders reaches its breaking point? With every wave sent into battle, the cracks in Russia's strategy and North Korea's involvement grow wider. Amid the chaos on the battlefield, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is turning his gaze eastward, not to North Korea, but to China. His plea? Leverage your influence to stop this bloodshed. Zelensky has repeatedly urged Beijing to use its clout with Pyongyang to halt the deployment of North Korean troops to Russia, framing it as a moral and strategic necessity. But here's the catch. China talks a good game, but their actions often tell a different story. Back in September 2024, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi stood at the United Nations and declared, "The top priority is to commit to no expansion of the battlefield." China is committed to playing a constructive role. Yet just months later, North Korean troops were marching into Kursk under Russia's banner. If that's constructive, someone might need to revisit the dictionary. China, it seems, prefers to sit on the fence, watching events unfold while weighing its own geopolitical interests. So, what about North Korea? Could Kim Jong-un send more troops? The current deployment of 12,000 North Korean soldiers is troubling enough. But Zelensky has warned that Kim Jong-un could send an additional 30,000 to 40,000 troops to bolster Russia's faltering offensive. That's not just speculation. It's based on intelligence and statements from Radio Free Europe and Ukrainian officials. Zelensky summed it up grimly in a recent interview. They can bring more, 30 or 40,000, or maybe 500. They can bring many people. Why? Because they have order, autocracy, and everything. If those reinforcements arrive, the dynamics in Kursk could shift dramatically, but not necessarily in Russia's favor. More poorly trained, undernourished soldiers might simply add fuel to the fire, turning the battlefield into an even bigger humanitarian disaster. While Kim sends troops, Zelensky is busy rallying the West. At the 25th meeting of the Defense Contact Group in Ramstein, Germany, Ukraine pushed for more military aid, particularly advanced weaponry to counter Russia's escalating aggression. This isn't just about holding Kursk. It's about sending a clear message to Moscow and its allies that Ukraine won't back down. The timing is critical. With a new US administration on the horizon, Ukraine knows the clock is ticking. Zelensky has been careful to maintain relationships with key allies like the United States, Germany, and the United Kingdom, emphasizing that every weapon, every dollar, and every political gesture matters in this war of attrition. But here's where it gets even more interesting. What if Kim Jong-un's reinforcements don't bolster Russia, but instead backfire spectacularly? Imagine this. Waves of new North Korean soldiers arrive only to face catastrophic losses, further eroding morale and deepening Russia's logistical nightmare. Or perhaps China, under increasing global pressure, decides to intervene in a way that actually slows the flow of North Korean troops, throwing a wrench into Moscow's plans. These scenarios aren't just wishful thinking. They're real possibilities that could reshape the conflict. The stakes are high, and every move on this geopolitical chessboard carries the potential for major consequences. As the situation in Kursk intensifies, the question isn't just who will win the battle. It's how the broader alliances and strategies will play out. Will Kim double down and send more troops, or will international pressure force him to reconsider? Will the West provide enough support to tip the scales, or will the conflict drag on with no clear end in sight? One thing is certain. The next moves by North Korea, Russia, and the West could determine not just the fate of Kursk, but the future of this war. And as always, the biggest questions remain unanswered, leaving us to wonder, what's the next chapter in this unfolding drama? So what do you think? Do you believe North Korea's elite soldiers will ever live up to their propaganda? Or are they destined to remain underfed pawns in a game far beyond their control? And what about the ripple effects? Will this failure force Kim Jong-un to rethink his alliances, or is he simply too entrenched in his deal with Moscow to back out now? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Let's take a step back and reflect on the whirlwind of events we've just dissected. Putin's grand plan to showcase strength by importing North Korean troops has crumbled spectacularly. What was meant to be a symbol of resilience has turned into a cautionary tale, with an entire North Korean battalion wiped out in just 48 hours. Instead of tipping the scales, these so-called elite reinforcements have become little more than a catastrophic footnote in a faltering campaign. And yet, the story doesn't stop here. Kursk isn't just a battlefield. It's a litmus test for global alliances and strategies. With Zelensky rallying Western support, Kim Jong-un facing mounting losses, and Putin's desperation growing, the potential for escalation looms large. This conflict is far from over, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But here's the lingering question. What if this is just the first act in a longer, more dangerous drama unfolding in Kursk? Could North Korea's deeper involvement bring even greater chaos? Or will we see a dramatic shift in alliances? The answers aren't clear yet, but one thing's for sure. This story is still being written, and its next chapter might reshape more than just Kursk. We'll explore these possibilities in the next episode. Until then, remember, the battlefield of Kursk is more than just a clash of forces. It's a stage where global power dynamics are playing out in real time. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep questioning the narratives. The story of Kursk is far from over, and we're here to navigate it with you.